I want to welcome everyone and thank you for attending this most important webinar. I'm Ed Langton, and I'm a member of the Mississippi State Board of Health. I'm also a concerned citizen as part of the MississippiHorizon.org organization. You will learn today how catastrophic this proposed change to our Mississippi State Constitution will be. Initiative 65 will be extremely detrimental to the citizens of our state. The Mississippi Department of Health heard the proponents in December of 19 and listened to all of their program and the amendment and so forth. After great study, the health department came out with its resolution and editorial opinion concerning the fact that this is not a good initiative to put on the Constitution. And we saw the errors and how fraught it was with problems associated for our state. So we have the pleasure today to have Luke Neferotis, who is Executive Vice President of SAM, which stands for Smart Approaches to Marijuana. And he is an individual as well that has a heart for this because he has young children and knows the detrimental effects that this has had on so many states in the nation. And he spent his career developing this to be able to educate people on its effects. So he will be talking to you soon, but it's my pleasure now to introduce fellow board member Jim Perry, who will take you through the ramifications of this amendment. Thank you. Jim?
Thanks, Ed, and thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to share my screen and see if my technology skills will allow us to work through this. We have a slideshow presentation to help guide our discussion today, and I want to talk a little bit about what Initiative 65 is, because this will be on the ballot this November 3rd. And the people of Mississippi will have the choice to make about whether or not they want to legalize marijuana, ostensibly for medicinal purposes. But as we'll discuss today, and hopefully more and more people around the state will learn in the months to come, it's a very wide-ranging initiative and program. And we do appreciate that medical marijuana may sound appealing. I believe that every board member on the State Board of Health and the people on this call, everybody wants more and better medical care, especially for the patients that typically we hear associated with medical marijuana: cancer patients, AIDS patients, epileptics. These are horrible diseases, and we appreciate that many of the people who are supporting and really been pushing Initiative 65 hope that it could be an answer to prayers, and we understand that, and we don't want to minimize the pain that comes along with that. However, the written word matters, and there's a lot of potential consequences to this, and because of that, we believe that Initiative 65 is the wrong way. It's the wrong path to take, and while it may be a worthy goal, the ends does not justify or even match the means in this situation, because it will have negative impacts on our kids, our communities, and frankly, all of Mississippi. And one of our major concerns with this initiative is that at the end of the day, what's really happening is we're giving special constitutional protections to the marijuana industry. We're putting one product, one drug in making it more important than almost anything else, because most things don't go in the Constitution. It's a big deal to put something in the state Constitution. And as we learn more and more about marijuana, and we'll hear more from Luke this afternoon, we're learning more and more about the impacts of marijuana every day. And as we learn more, just like we learn more about tobacco, any future changes to this program would require a statewide vote, which is very high burden. And as we talked about, despite the good intentions of some, we can't ignore that this is a giveaway. The marijuana industry nationally, the legal industry, is a $14 billion of sales a year, and it's growing. And so why is this in the Constitution as opposed to going through the legislative process? Well, by putting it in the Constitution, it really makes the rules that are being put in place right now, based upon what we know right now, makes it untouchable by the legislature or the governor. It's being done under the guise of medicine, but what we hear over and over again is, oh, well, let's legalize marijuana, tax it, and we'll have some revenue for schools or bridges or taking care of the health impacts. Well, what we'll learn today, and we hope to educate the people of the state, there'll be no tax revenue under this constitutional amendment. If Initiative 65 passes, there'll be no revenue for schools, roads, or communities. And in fact, it can be sold basically anywhere in the state. Very little way to regulate it. And that's why we say, if you like big tobacco, you're going to love big marijuana. Because what we saw in the 50s and 60s is that big tobacco, we'd see advertisements that said, 9 out of 10 doctors agree, smoke Lucky Strike, they're good for your throat or good for your digestive system. Well, now big marijuana is telling us the same lie. They're saying that it's healthy. Well, we know that marijuana, and Luke will tell us more about this later, we know that marijuana can have real harmful health impacts. So let's not talk about it being medicine. Now, there can be some, as we've learned, there can be some medicinal benefits to cannabis, but smoking and vaping, that's not medicine. So why is big marijuana pushing this? Why is the out-of-state marijuana industry spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to campaign in Mississippi to convince people to vote for Initiative 65? Well, this isn't everybody's motivation. I want to appreciate that, but for the objective of big marijuana, that out-of-state $14 billion industry, they want to maximize their ability to legally sell marijuana to as many people as possible with as few restrictions as possible so they can make it the biggest profit possible. So is it medicine? Well, if it was medicine, let's treat it like medicine. Let's have research, let's have testing, let's know what's in it. One joint is not the same as the next joint. And as Luke will say, the THC contents have gotten higher and higher. If you can't control the dosage of something, that's not medicine. If you don't know what's in it consistently, that's not medicine. What's medicine are the 4 FDA-approved drugs based on cannabis that you can get legally today in Mississippi that are helping AIDS patients, helping cancer patients, helping address epilepsy. And with more research, we could maybe get some more safer medicines. I'd be for that. But again, as the American Heart Association said last week with a new study, smoking and vaping does damage to your heart and lungs. That is not medicine. This picture on this page here shows some of the sheriffs that were last week, or week before last, came out and told us why they oppose Initiative 65. It would be a nightmare for local law enforcement. How do they decide what's legal marijuana and what's illegal marijuana? And as we've seen in other states around the country that have gone down this path, you see an increased incidence of drug driving. Well, you don't have a roadside test for drug driving. And it's going to make things very, very, very complicated for law enforcement as they try to enforce state drug law that conflicts with federal drug law. And let's think about what message we're sending to our kids. I have 2 kids, and if this passes, what they're going to be hearing in the years to come is that marijuana is okay because it's medicine. Well, they're going to take that into their system, just like big tobacco was telling everybody it was healthy for a reason. They internalize that and say, well, it's okay to smoke pot. Well, if you are smoking pot regularly before the age of 25, it can cause permanent cognitive loss of function. That's a problem. And it's already making it harder and harder for teachers and parents when kids are bringing into school. And we heard this from some school superintendents the other day, when they're bringing in vaping paraphernalia and prescription drugs they steal out of their parents' cabinet. Well, if the marijuana is legal and they can go get, under this amendment, they could go get 10 joints a day if they're under 18, if their parent says it's okay. Well, why do we say 10 joints a day? That's because this Initiative 65 would let a user get 5 ounces of marijuana a month. 5 ounces of marijuana works out to about 10 joints a day. That's a lot of medicine. And if you're well connected and you can find a doctor who'll give you the certificate, it's not a prescription, give you the certificate, and you're wealthy enough to afford it, because medical marijuana around the country is typically, about 40% more expensive than street marijuana. And you can pay cash for it because Medicare, Medicaid, and private insurance doesn't pay for the higher cost medical marijuana. Then you can have your marijuana legally. But if you are not as well connected, if you don't have that access to the doctor, which unfortunately a lot of Mississippians do not, and you're not wealthy enough to pay that cash for the higher cost marijuana, you're still at a much greater risk of all the legal ramifications, jail or whatnot, and regardless of what's in the Mississippi Constitution. I think that's a real problem. Let's not forget, you don't get medical marijuana under Initiative 65. If it passes, you don't get it from a pharmacy or doctor. You get it from a special marijuana dispensary. And the cities and counties around the state, if they decide, just like they could do with a liquor store now, they could say, well, we got to make sure we really want it here on this street or on this street corner. Initiative 65 would prevent that. Wherever a pharmacy is allowed, a pot shop would have to be allowed. Wherever commercial business is allowed, you'd have to allow a marijuana grower or processor. That takes control out of the hands of local government elected officials. They can do it with almost any other business or homeowners or whatever to be able to control how they want their communities to grow. Initiative 65 takes that out of their hands permanently, being the state constitution. As Ed mentioned, he and I are both on the State Board of Health, and I'm honored to serve, and I appreciate the opportunity. And we have a bunch of good members on the State Board of Health, but we're an independent board. We don't work for the governor. We don't work for the legislature. And under Initiative 65, it would put us in charge of regulating the medical marijuana program to the extent that the Constitution wouldn't have already tied the hands behind our back. We would be invested as unelected officials, raising the revenue for this program. Fees, taxes, whatever you want to call it, we would be in charge of setting that. It couldn't be higher than the state sales tax rate. And that revenue, we as unelected officials would get to decide how to spend it. We'd have to spend it on running the marijuana program, but we couldn't spend it on anything else. It doesn't go to the general fund. It would not provide one dime for roads, law enforcement, or schools. Forever and ever, any marijuana revenue that comes from running the marijuana program would be trapped in the marijuana program. That is a sweetheart deal for big marijuana, and that may be one of the reasons why they're pushing Initiative 65 rather than going through the legislative process. That is a much lower tax rate or fee rate than anything paid by big tobacco or cigarette smokers. At the end of the day, this is a backdoor legalization of marijuana, and that has consequences. And we just know some of the consequences now, but we're going to learn more as time goes on. Unfortunately, if this passes, it may be too late. For example, there's a lot of Mississippians that appreciate the rights we have under the Second Amendment to buy and own a firearm. But the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has made clear it's against federal law to be a marijuana user, whether it's under medical marijuana program or not. It's against federal law to buy or possess a firearm, even if the marijuana is legal under the Mississippi Constitution. What else do we not know? So how can we stop Initiative 65? We need your help. As we talked about earlier, the out-of-state big marijuana industry is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars promoting this initiative. We don't have those kind of resources at this point. However, if you'd like to donate, you can go to MississippiHorizon.org to donate. But we really need you to volunteer. We need you to tell your family, your friends, the neighbors, people you go to church with, people your kids play baseball with. We need you to tell them why you're opposed to Initiative 65, and hopefully you will be, and we hope they will be too. Write your local newspaper a letter to the editor, call into talk radio, Facebook, Twitter, any sort of way to get the word out that we need your help to stop Initiative 65. I appreciate your time, and if you have any questions, please do email us at info@MississippiHorizon.org. I'll turn this over to Luke now so we can talk more about what we've learned about the health impacts of marijuana over the years.
Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you for that wonderful presentation, really laying the groundwork, for your state and what's going on there. I am very honored to be a part of today's conversation and webinar. I hope that you find my PowerPoint informative. Just to introduce myself a little bit, my name is Luke Niferatos. I'm the Executive Vice President at SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. We are the nation's leading nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, really educating the public on the harms of marijuana and opposed to the commercialization of marijuana. So I'll pull up my slides here. We can jump in. Okay, great. So as I said, today we're going to talk about some lessons learned. We're going to get into the science, et cetera. But before I get into that, I want to just talk a little bit about my organization, who we are. So I mentioned we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We have two aims, really. One is to educate the public on the science of today's marijuana, to use cutting-edge 21st century science. Actually, we have a leading scientific advisory board that leads everything we do, which is folks from Yale and Princeton and University of Colorado, marijuana researchers who are doing actual studies on marijuana as we speak right now. And they guide our work, which we're really proud of. And we promote what we see as public health-oriented policies on marijuana, not profit-oriented policies. We really want to look at what puts health first, the health of the public, makes people's lives healthier and better, not worse, not sucked into addiction and other things. So that's very important to us. I mentioned we're nonpartisan. We were co-founded by former Congressman Patrick Kennedy of the Kennedy family, as well as former George W. Bush era speechwriter David Frum, along with my boss, Dr. Kevin Sabet, who worked for the last 3 White House administrations. We're very proud of our nonpartisan pedigree. Our advisory board I mentioned, we do a lot of work in the press and the media, educating on the subject. We have worked with basically every national and state level health association, whether it's ASAM, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Medical Association, et cetera. And we have affiliates, virtually every state and actually in a couple of countries as well. So if there's nothing you come away with from today, I hope it's this. It's that this issue of marijuana, whether you're talking about medical or recreational, this issue of legalization of marijuana is not this false dichotomy that's kind of being put out there. I think when we have conversations about this, it's either we're throwing everybody in prison or we're just legalizing it, whether for medical or recreational. And there's really no nuance to the discussion. We think that that's really a false dichotomy. In fact, this is really a much more nuanced conversation. Really, there are 3 buckets, and I want to break them out, and I'll explain why in a second. But the first bucket is, should we criminalize users for low-level possession? That's the first question. And people have varying ideas on that. Our organization thinks that, especially for youth, if they're getting caught with a joint in their pocket, they should get a referral, maybe to treatment if they have an addiction issue, or have another chance rather than getting a permanent record, right on the spot if they've got a joint in their pocket. But that's one question: is should we criminalize low-level possession and criminalize users? Then there's the second bucket of the conversation, which is around medical and medicinal use of the marijuana plant. Now, the marijuana plant has hundreds of different components to it. Many of us have heard of CBD. That's one component of the marijuana plant. It does not get you high, unlike THC, which is another component of the marijuana plant, and that is the component that gets you high, that people smoke for and vape, et cetera. But there are literally hundreds of other components in this plant, all of which can be extracted and potentially can be used for medicinal purposes. We've seen, Jim rightfully mentioned, there are 4, actually I think there are more than 4 marijuana-based medications that have been approved by the FDA, have gone through clinical trials, been approved by science, and you can get a prescription for those from your doctor today. And we support that process, SAM does. We support that scientific process, ensuring that patients get the medicine that they need in a safe and regulated way. We get concerned as an organization when states put medicine up to a vote of the people or up to a vote of the legislators. We have never put medicines to a vote before. In fact, the whole reason for developing the FDA was to protect the public from big corporate drug manufacturers that were testing their completely untested drugs on the public without any accountability, and actually killing people and hurting people. So that's why the FDA exists, is to protect the public from being experimented on like lab rats. And so we're concerned that we're kind of heading back that direction with marijuana, where all of a sudden, drug companies can put their drugs up for a vote and then experiment with their drug on the public. And to us, that's very concerning. It's not a regulated and scientific way to approach it. And so that's just something that we're concerned about. But that's the second bucket. And then the third bucket, of course, is recreational use. Should there be recreational use of marijuana, which obviously is not being voted on this year in your state. The reason why I break these buckets out is because oftentimes in campaigns like this, you probably already heard it, marijuana, let's stop locking people up for marijuana, so let's legalize medical marijuana. Well, those are 2 different buckets. If you are concerned about criminalizing low-level marijuana users, et cetera, we can address that issue with policy solutions like decriminalization, et cetera, without legalizing medical marijuana. In the same way, if you say, well, marijuana is medicine, So now I want to legalize medical marijuana. Well, marijuana has many components, so we got to spell out what are you talking about. So hopefully this helps to show kind of the policy nuance. There are multiple options we can employ when looking at marijuana legalization options. I thought this was a really important quote. It came from The Economist. It said, "While laboratory animals are an expensive way of understanding the risks of cannabis use, North Americans come free." What do they mean by that? We are testing this drug on our entire population and giving up our population as test subjects to this industry for free. And people around the world can't believe we're doing it this way, but we are, with very little regulation, very little understanding of what marijuana will do to folks when it's available commercially. So I thought this quote was really an important way to look at this issue. Late last year, the United States Surgeon General, Dr. Jerome Adams, who we really enjoy working with quite frequently, he issued a historic advisory for the entire country saying that the marijuana of today is so much more potent than it has ever been. He said, "It's not your mama's marijuana." That's what he said. Much more potent than it's ever been, much more addictive. And that we are seeing now, because of states legalizing medical and recreational marijuana, we are seeing unprecedented levels of youth among pregnant women and youth, which is very concerning for anyone who follows what the impacts of marijuana use is, which we'll get into in a second. What's really important is, and Jim, again, very rightfully mentioned this, the influence of big tobacco. Altria, the former owner of Philip Morris and Marlboro, has put in over $2 billion in the marijuana industry. So they are 100% in on the marijuana industry's game. They are very much looking to drive a profit from this, as they have before. And, oftentimes we hear, let's get rid of evil big pharma and let's, legalize marijuana to kind of stick it to big pharma. Well, big pharma wants you to do that. The guy who wrote the playbook for OxyContin got a whole bunch of people addicted. The former CEO of Purdue Pharma. For those of us who remember Purdue Pharma is being sued and fined and, hauled into court all over the country, that guy, the guy who wrote the whole playbook, is in the medical marijuana industry. So if you're concerned about that influence, you should definitely be doing your homework on this. And of course, alcohol is jumping headfirst into this industry. We're seeing all the big owners, Constellation Brands, over $1 billion into the marijuana industry now. So who's really pushing this push for legalization? Yes, there are the folks that, I'm from Colorado. I live in Colorado, and I see legalization firsthand every day. I watched us go from nothing to medical marijuana to recreational marijuana. I watched that whole transformation happen in my state. Yes, there were the folks who really thought that this would be a medicine that could help them. But I looked around, and the people that I saw at the hearings, the people that I saw at the town halls, the people that I saw funding the ballot measures, the people that I saw speaking were all of these guys. The folks in suits looking to make a ton of money. By the way, this is not a stock photo. This is the first ever marijuana hedge fund based in Wall Street, investing hundreds of millions of dollars in the marijuana industry. This is called Privateer Holdings. And these are the guys who are really running the push for medical marijuana legalization and beyond, because they're looking to make money off of this. So we're not talking about joints anymore. A lot of people think, this is just, if you're going to just smoke a joint, whatever. But that's not what this is about anymore. These are the products we're seeing proliferate on legal marijuana markets, whether it's medical or recreational. And again, the term medical, I'm going to get into that in a second. The term medical is really a marketing term. Marijuana is marijuana, and the products that are being sold are the products that are being sold. I'm from Colorado. When we went from medical marijuana to recreational marijuana, that night, January 1st in 2014, all the medical marijuana shops just changed their signs to say recreational. They sold the same products. They continue to sell the same products. So all of these are, whether you want to call it medical or recreational, it's all the same. And these products are what proliferates. Now, I think all of us can agree, none of this is I would say it's 21 and up. I think this is definitely appealing to youth. And it's something we're continuing to see happen regardless of what the regulations are. And these are the pot shops we see everywhere. The pot shop on the top left is just about across the street from my wife's high school that she graduated from in Denver. And so you see kids hanging out in front of these shops. The normalization, that's what happens. When you allow this industry through medical marijuana, they pop up their shops, and the whole goal is to make it so it's totally normalized to see pot shops, totally normalized to see products like this. And they call it medicine. You see these shops, you see the little green cross. It's as if it's medicine, but they're selling those kinds of products. And the potency is out of this world now. If you think you know what marijuana is from a few years ago even, you don't know what marijuana is. It's a totally different drug now. The potency has skyrocketed just in the last 2 decades. We're going now from an average of 3% THC to an average of 20% THC. And then you look at these concentrates here in the bottom right portion of my screen. That's what's really selling a lot now, are the concentrates, which that average now is shot up in the 50% range. So we're talking about hundreds of times the average now potency of THC than it's ever been before. And we're now starting to see these products go up even into the 97 and 99% THC potencies. Now, I want to give you an example to kind of paint a picture for you as to how different this drug is from the 90s to today, which is only really a result from legalization. Imagine, let's just say THC, let's compare THC to caffeine, okay? So pretend like THC is caffeine for a moment. In the 90s, the average marijuana product you would get would be like a 20-ounce cola worth of caffeine, okay, in the 90s. 20-ounce cola worth of caffeine. Now, fast forward, post-legalization medical and recreational marijuana, you have products now that are the equivalent of, if you went to go buy that same Diet Cola, you would get 33 medium cappuccinos worth of caffeine in that same bottle. Okay, so that's the difference with marijuana potency. Marijuana of yesteryears is astronomically more potent now. It's a totally different drug. Much more addictive, much more harmful. And I started 2 companies. I sold one of my companies in the healthcare space, and I look at this from a business perspective. I look at the market. More than 15% of the market now across the country is these 97% THC levels compared to 3% THC. Wildly different. And the 10 to 15% potency levels are now under 2%. So what that tells me from a business perspective is the market is going where the demand is and where the profit is, and that is with the higher potency products. That's where they're making the money. And this is what those concentrates I mentioned look like. This is not a natural plant being grown on farms. This is a genetically modified substance now that's being bred to be more potent than the plant is naturally, and it's being cooked up in chemists' offices and laboratories, not being grown naturally. It's very important we acknowledge what the difference is here. And of course, they're coming in all sorts of child-friendly product shapes, like gummy bears. And again, your ballot measure has language that says, oh, can't be appealing to kids. Well, every ballot measure has language that says can't be appealing to kids. And yet these products are legal in state legal marijuana markets. These gummy bears are being sold as medicine in Washington State. 2 years ago, they tried to pass a rule to say that that could not be sold in that form. The gummy bears couldn't be sold as marijuana edibles. But the marijuana industry put in a huge lobbying campaign and struck that rule from the books just before it was going to be signed into law. So the industry does not want to make products that are only appealing to adults. They understand that in order to develop more customers, they need to develop more youth-friendly products. So, with medical marijuana, we always hear that one of the biggest reasons to legalize medical marijuana is to help with the opioid crisis, to reduce the opioid epidemic. And I think that's so important. We have 60,000 plus people a year who are dying from the opioid crisis. We need to do something about it. And honestly, if the data and the science told us that medical marijuana fixed that problem, I think we all have to take a really hard look at that policy decision. Unfortunately, the data are not telling us this. You see these billboards from the marijuana industry. Some of you may see them in your state. I don't know. We see them all over here in Colorado and in other states. But they quote cherry-picked studies like this study from Journal of American Medical Association, 2014. Okay, so 2014, this study came out, and it appeared that states that legalized medical marijuana had 25% fewer opioid deaths. And everyone thought, wow, that's very encouraging. Maybe this could help solve the problem. But we learned a valuable lesson in science with this process. They updated that study in JAMA in 2019. And they found that with the additional years added up to 2019, it actually resulted in a 23% increase in opioid deaths in states that legalized medical marijuana. So what this teaches us is 2 things. One is we cannot cherry pick studies right now. We are so early in the cycle. We've only had legalized marijuana for maybe 10 years tops, and we just have in different states. And we just have to wait a lot longer to be able to formulate any kind of hypothesis as to what these policies' impact is on things like the opioid crisis. So I'm not even going to point to this slide and say, I know for a fact that legalizing medical marijuana increases opioid deaths. I won't say that because we have a lot more research we need to do. But what I can say is there is mixed research on either side, and we have some concerning data that we really need to look at carefully. What we have also seen a couple other different studies. Again, I'm not going to tell you this is the final answer, but looking at states with medical marijuana legalization, those states tend to have higher non-medical prescription opioid use issues. So looking across these age ranges, we're seeing those increases. So it is something we need to look at. Let's get into the science. Just today, again, this is a vital example that I hope that you walk away with from today as you're considering medical marijuana in your state. Just today, I just copied and pasted a screenshot from the article. It's everywhere now, so you can look it up after this. But landmark study, over 1,000 patients that they followed across the UK, looking at women who used marijuana during pregnancy, and they found that they are much more likely to have children with autism. If pregnant mothers use this, their children are much more likely to develop autism after birth. So we're just finding out now these kinds of effects, and more research will come out, and we better have a really good idea of what this does before approving it as a medicine for patients, because God forbid if 5-10 years from now we find out a whole generation of people have severe limitations or other ill effects from their parents or from others using or from using a drug that they were told would be medicine for what they needed. And what's very striking about this study is that my state of Colorado and 9 other states have listed marijuana as a treatment for autism, as a qualifying condition for autism. And then a study like this comes out and blows that out of the water. Obviously, we have a lot more research to do, but with research like this coming out, it is appalling that any state health board would approve this drug as a help for something that it could be creating. So again, the science is still forthcoming. We really cannot approve this as a medication as a whole plant to just smoke. We need to look at this like we've looked at every other medication, where it goes through rigorous clinical trials. The components are broken out and extracted and tested. And we see how they affect folks over time. That's so important for the safety of patients. A few other research. I'm not going to bore you with a ton of research today, but or at least make you go through tons and tons of slides of it. But these are some key research studies, multiple studies from some of the most foremost peer-reviewed institutions. The Lancet Journal of Psychiatry is one of the most credible institutions that looks at the research on marijuana and its effect on the brain, have found scarce evidence of marijuana helping with depression. In fact, it seems to maybe exacerbate depression, ADHD, Tourette's, etc. Low evidence that cannabinoids were effective in mitigating pain from the Pain Journal. Outweighed potential harm, the harms outweighed the potential benefits for other patients. So we're seeing a lot of research out there that's been done on this that says just smoking a joint, may actually have worse effects than its therapeutic effects that it may have. So it's important that we look at that. The other thing is, a lot of times you'll hear, and I think people kind of tune this out, you'll hear, medical marijuana is a Trojan horse for recreational marijuana. And I do think it's unfair to say that without having some kind of basis for it, which I'm going to give you a little bit of information on. But what I will tell you is I mentioned that recreational marijuana is the same thing as medical marijuana in terms of the products sold. The research is bearing that out. There was research that was just released this year, found that overwhelmingly the products being sold in medical marijuana programs, super potent, as I mentioned before, much higher than 15%. The only marijuana that's really been found to have any kind of therapeutic value at all was under 15% potency, and none of the products are coming out at less than 15% potency. So very important we note that, again, it's very much the same as the recreational products that are being sold. And I mentioned the Lancet and how credible it is. They did a very large, more than 1,000 subject study across multiple large metropolitan areas, such as London, for example, and I believe New York City. And they found that regular users of today's highly potent marijuana are up to 5 times more likely to develop psychosis and mental illness issues. So this highly potent drug that we're now seeing in these legal marijuana markets is leading to much more probability of psychosis and mental illness. So we're very concerned about those developments. The medical marijuana dispensaries in Colorado, a landmark study by Denver Health in 2018 found that over 83% of those dispensaries are recommending their pot products to pregnant women. Now think back to the study that I just talked about that says that women who are pregnant who use marijuana regularly, their children have a much higher chance of developing autism, according to this latest study that came out today. So deeply irresponsible these dispensaries are becoming, and it's very much like big tobacco, which is their primary financial backer. So we shouldn't be surprised at what we're seeing. The industry is backed by addiction for profit juggernauts, and this is their kind of MO. And we have to be aware of that. We need to protect patients from an industry that wants to victimize them. I understand the folks that want to get access to a medication that could help, but this industry is using them and wants to addict them and drive profit off of them, and we've got to protect them in your state. So it's time for a reality check. Legalization advocates have long openly admitted, it is an open secret among everyone, that legalizing medical marijuana is the first step to full recreational legalization. And the head of the group, NORML, which is one of the main and longest standing pro-marijuana legalization groups, said they're going to use medical marijuana as a red herring to give marijuana a good name. And it has worked fantastically. And they pushed, for medicine by vote, and that's been their strategy. And again, it's important that we talk, note, who are we talking about when we talk about legalizing medical marijuana? Who gets access to it? And the way that the committee, likely in Mississippi, will push this is they'll say, well, it's only for people who really, really need it. But then you look at the text, and as Jim kind of alluded to, it's very open-ended and very vague in terms of who will qualify as having a condition for medical marijuana. It seems like it will be very much open to interpretation, and a lot of people will get access to this that maybe are not desperately in need of new kinds of medications. The average medical marijuana card holder, medical marijuana user, is not who we would all think of. It's a white male, 30 years of age, no history of life-threatening disease, history of drug and alcohol abuse. That is the average user. Less than 5% of medical marijuana card holders have any form of cancer, HIV, glaucoma, etc. These are things we commonly hear people use medical marijuana for. So it's a very, very, very small number of people that ultimately end up using medical marijuana who actually maybe could possibly need it. So I think we would all be having a different conversation about probably this ballot measure and any other if this were a ballot measure saying only patients in the last stages of life who, cancer patients and in terminal stage care who need, something. I mean, I don't think anybody would withhold any kind of medication or drug from somebody who's in their last stages of life. That's not what this is about. If it was about this, I don't think there would be any controversy. What this is about is opening doors so many, many more people can use marijuana than just the people who desperately need to try different kinds of medications. It is very important we make that distinction. And you ask the people who are pushing to legalize medical marijuana in your state, ask them, who are the people that should get access to medical marijuana? What illnesses? What number of people do they think should have access to this as a potential medication? And what is the scientific backing for those claims? Very, very important that we ask those questions. So, you talk about marijuana as medicine. Obviously, we look at the vaping crisis that continues to happen. For those of us who've forgotten about it, over the late last year, people were getting illnesses in their lungs from using vapes, and it overwhelmingly turned out to be marijuana vapes that were the culprit in this crisis. So this crisis continues. In fact, in Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, we have new cases actually just over the last week. People who developed this debilitating and many times fatal illness in their lungs. Over 80% of these cases were marijuana vapes. And we were told it was overwhelmingly black market. That turned out to be false too. The CDC reported 1 in 6 of the marijuana vaping illnesses came from the commercial marijuana market. And unfortunately, at least one person died from a medical marijuana dispensaries sold marijuana vapes. So they were sold something that they were told was medicine, medical marijuana, and it killed the person because it was an unregulated vaporizer with unregulated vaping coils, because the FDA hasn't looked at any of these things. They're all illegal. So again, have to be very, very careful with the medications that we give to patients who desperately need it. I gave a couple other examples there. We also, I thought this was very poignant. A guy came from Ohio to where marijuana is illegal, came to Colorado to get legal, regulated marijuana. He thought it was safer, especially because he never bought cartridges off the street. Those are the cartridges you put in your vaporizer to vape marijuana. He never bought it off the street. He bought it from the legalized medical marijuana stores, and unfortunately developed this debilitating illness. So we're told also maybe we should legalize medical marijuana to get rid of some of that illicit market and reduce, get rid of the drug dealers, help get purer forms of the drug perhaps. That's just not proving to happen anywhere you look. You look in California, their Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom, said it's getting worse. The black market is not better since legalizing in the state, whether it was with medical or recreational. You look at Colorado, we're shipping out black market weed to 32 different states, if not more. So these states never voted to have marijuana in their states, but because the industry is propagating and it wants to get its product into other markets. This just is a byproduct with what happens when you allow an industry to sell drugs. And we've seen the cartels invade and use the cover of legalized marijuana, these grows for medical marijuana or for recreational marijuana, and they set up shop and they grow their own illegal weed, but nobody can tell because marijuana is legal in the state. And we've got tons of coverage on all the different kinds of cartels that are using this. Mexican cartels, Chinese cartels, et cetera, from all over the world are coming in to states that have legalized medical or recreational, and they're using that market to sell their black market weed. So the black market didn't go away. In fact, it only got worse. And oftentimes we hear that this may be an issue of social justice, that, especially in light of what's going on in this day and age right now, that, we should legalize marijuana to, help those who have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. And I would actually say that this has been the reverse of social justice. I think it's been the social injustice in many different ways, but this particularly, I think, spells it out very well. Look at this map. Okay, on the bottom right-hand side here, you have a map of Denver, Colorado, and the green is where Caucasian communities live. The yellow and the purple and any other colors you see are where the minority communities live. Now I want you to look in the top left map. Each one of those dots is a pot shop. And as you're looking at this, I'm sure you're seeing what I'm seeing. It is like a heat map. The marijuana industry is putting all of their stores right where the minority communities are. And we've seen this before. This is not new. This is not surprising. Who taught big marijuana in this playbook? Big tobacco. We all know where the tobacco stores are in our communities. We all know where the liquor stores are in our communities. We all know where the payday loan stores are in our communities. They are not in the nice, predominantly white suburbs. They are located where the vulnerable communities are. Because these industries are addiction for profit, and they have a business model, and their goal is to addict those most vulnerable. And we have to note that that's the industry that's pushing for medical marijuana legalization, and will be allowed to come into play. So I'm going to finish up with a little discussion of the workplace and economy. A lot of times we hear that the budget could benefit from legalizing medical marijuana, get taxes, et cetera. But this isn't the case anywhere that you look. And all these states now have recreational, but the portion of the state budget went up with recreational. So this is probably the maximum you could look at with marijuana tax revenue for your state. And we're looking at less than 1%, maybe even less than 0.5% for your state, probably even less than that since you'll do medical as a percent of your state budget. So you can ask, don't believe me on this, you can ask former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, Democrat, who's running for Senate here in Colorado. He will tell you he's in support of legalization, but he says don't legalize marijuana for the revenue. It is a drop in the bucket. You ask our former Colorado pot czar, Andrew Friedman. He is in support of legalization, but he will tell you don't legalize marijuana for the tax revenue. It is non-existent. You will not pay for the things that people are saying you can pay for. So don't do this for the tax revenue. You will not get the windfall that you expect. And in fact, you'll get a lot of costs that you didn't anticipate. This was a Denver Post article on how it didn't solve our budget problems. And in fact, nobody's asking about the costs. What are the costs of legalizing medical marijuana? What could the impact be? And so, when I started a company, I had a board and I reported to that board. And if I came to them and said, hey, we made $100 million in revenue this year, they'd laugh me out of the room because they'd say, well, what was your cost of doing business? If it cost you $200 million to make $100 million, you're running a lousy business and you're losing a ton of money. So we have to ask the same question of any kind of program where we're expecting revenue from. Is, what does medical marijuana's cost to our government? And we're seeing workplace use of marijuana skyrocket since states started legalizing medical marijuana. 230% increase over the years of 2011 and 2016. We're seeing double-digit increases in states that legalized recreational marijuana. We're continuing to look at the breakouts for medical, but you see these increases in states where this industry has been allowed to propagate. So the question is, do you want to have a truck driver that is getting impaired? Or a pilot driver, et cetera, or says that they're taking medical marijuana. What do you do in that circumstance? And speaking of pilot drivers and truck drivers, they're twice the national average increase in marijuana positivity is amongst the safety-sensitive workforce. So that's pilots, truck drivers, et cetera. So these are concerns we have to think about as well from the workplace perspective. And the courts are now starting to weigh in on behalf of marijuana users when it comes to these employment lawsuits. An employer who refused to hire a medical marijuana user, the Rhode Island court ruled that company violated state law, had to hire that person. New Mexico ruled that companies have to start paying for employees' medical marijuana use. So we're seeing a slate of decisions that should concern any decision maker at a corporation or any employer, any small business owner. These things should be very concerning. So I will finish there. I want to just give my reason for being here, and I'll wrap it up. And I know we're going to have some other folks talk and do some Q&A, but I said before, I'm from Colorado. I am raising my 3.5-year-old daughter in Colorado, along with my lovely wife. And before I joined SAM about 3 years ago. My daughter was about 6 months old or so. We were living in Northeast Denver, Stapleton neighborhood. A lot of young families like us with kids our kids' age. And we would take my daughter out for walks in her stroller down the sidewalk, usually every evening. And one night we're walking her down the sidewalk with her in her stroller, and she's sleeping in her stroller, and she just gets covered in a cloud of secondhand marijuana smoke. And she's breathing that in as she's sleeping. And we as her parents are pushing the stroller, and we're just kind of both quietly acknowledging to ourselves that our daughter is inhaling the smoke, and there's nothing we can do about that. And my wife turns to me and she goes, that happens just about every time we take her for a walk. That is not normal. And I turned to her and I said, you're absolutely right. It does happen all the time, and it is not normal, and something needs to be done about this. So that is what really ignited my passion as a parent and as a dad, but really as somebody who cares about public health and wanting to get patients the medications that they need in ways that protect their health. That's what ignited me to fight for this cause and fight for a smart approach to marijuana policy. I'm not interested in throwing people in jail, but I'm also not interested in allowing people to be victimized and addicted and harmed by a drug industry that does not have their health as their #1 priority. So that's why I do what I do. A lot of the information I talked about today and a whole lot more is in our yearly Lessons Learned from Marijuana Legalization report. You can get that free on our website, which is learnaboutsam.org. Some books that my boss, Dr. Kevin Sabet, wrote. Reefer Sanity is a great one you can read. Covers the medical marijuana myth very, very well. And my email is down below. I'm happy to take questions or emails afterward. You can feel free to contact me at any time. So that'll wrap it up for me. I'm going to go ahead and close out my presentation. I want to thank you, Ed, and others for having me on and for the great work you're doing for your state and your service on the State Board of Health as well.
Thank you so much, Luke, and your passion. And it's just incredible how detrimental this is to our society. And just to clarify as well, the way they designed this constitutional amendment was that we don't have any tax. It's a fee that's equivalent to the tax rate. So they got around the fact that the state cannot touch one dime that is paid in the 7% fee on the sale of marijuana. So everybody's thinking, well, can't we use this for roads and bridges? So like Jim was saying, so it's one of the most unbelievable parts of this whole amendment that just that reason alone, regardless of other things, is that it's not going to benefit the state at all. It's going to take it down as your expenses proved in your slide. Excellent presentation. Cannot thank you enough, Luke.
Thank you.
And if anyone's got any questions at this point, I don't know if we had any come in or not, but there's still time if you'd like to submit any questions. We'd be happy to answer anything. We have no problem with you asking just anything whatsoever. We do want to, can we post the slide again on how can we stop 65, just to make sure everybody's got the, we want to make sure that you have the info at MississippiHorizon.org as far as emailing. And as far as volunteering or donating, that's at www.mississippihorizon.org. Please spread the word. This will all be posted on our website, as well as the alcohol and tobacco tax, the Justice Department's ruling on firearms, not being allowed to get a license to buy one, or concealed carry for that matter as well. So many other valuable facts that we'll post on there, a red line of the actual amendment so that you can really compare the written word and not take a lot of snippets that may mislead you. Jim, you got anything further to add, or? I think you got him muted. Well, we got you muted. Yeah, just a minute. There we go.
Well, I was saying something very profound, but I
Couldn't agree more.
assume that y'all answered yes on the chat question about will the PowerPoint slides be available?
Right.
Yes.
Will be. Well, any other, no questions? I can check that one more last time before we end. We thank those who have tuned in. We thank you so very much. And get out there and spread the word, please, to protect our citizens. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you all.
Okay.